The cold on Viral 9 wasn't like Earth's winter. It didn't just bite, it swallowed. The kind of cold that turned breath into glass and made metal groan like a living thing. Inside the main dome of the Auriga colony, the hum of life support was the only thing standing between 43 people and total silence. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, lit by the faint glow of a red dwarf star too weak to warm the planet properly. Snow didn't fall here. It drifted in slow crystalline swirls, sharp as ground glass. The colony had been built to last 10 years. They'd only made it through 3. It started with the drills, deep beneath the ice. Autonomous mining bots were supposed to carve out veins of rare minerals. Lithium, cobalt, iridium, stuff Earth couldn't get enough of anymore. But 2 weeks ago, one of the bots stopped transmitting. Then another. Then the seismic sensors picked up strange vibrations. Rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, but coming from half a kilometer down. At first, they thought it was a glitch. Equipment failed all the time out here. But then the ground near Outpost Gamma cracked open like an eggshell. Not from pressure, not from ice shifting. Something had pushed its way up. What came out wasn't rock. It wasn't ice. It moved. It looked like black glass, jagged and shifting with threads of blue light pulsing inside it. It didn't have eyes, but it knew where the heat sources were. Within hours, it had drained the power core at Gamma, leaving the outpost dark and frozen. 2 technicians who went to investigate never came back. Their suits were found empty, fused to the ground like they'd been poured into the ice. Panic didn't hit all at once. It crept in, quiet and cold like the frost forming on the inside of the dome windows. The colony leader sent a priority distress call. Not just a message. Full-band emergency burst, encrypted, flagged with the highest clearance code Earth had ever created for off-world crises. It included video, sensor logs, thermal imaging, everything. They begged for help. Not reinforcements, not scientists. Just a ship, any ship. Get them out before whatever was down there learned how to climb. Back on Earth, the signal arrived at the Interplanetary Monitoring Hub in Geneva. It pinged through the system like any other data stream. An AI flagged it as anomalous activity, possible system failure. A junior analyst reviewed it, frowned, and forwarded it to the Crisis Response Division. There, it sat. Earth wasn't ignoring them out of cruelty. It was drowning in its own problems. Coastal cities were still rebuilding after the Great Surge. Food shortages had sparked riots in 3 continents. And the fragile alliance that had funded the Auriga colony, the one between the North American bloc, the Pan-Asian Coalition, and the European Federation, had collapsed 6 months earlier over a dispute about water rights in the Arctic. No one wanted to spend billions on a rescue mission to a dying rock, 47 light-years away when their own cities were burning. The call was debated in closed-door meetings. Some argued the footage looked staged. Maybe the colonists were trying to force a bailout. Others said even if it was real, sending a ship would take 18 months minimum. By then, the colony would be gone. And if this thing was contagious, well, better to let it burn out there than risk bringing it home. So the official response was silence. But the colonists didn't know that. They kept sending messages, every 6 hours like clockwork. At first they were calm, professional, requesting immediate extraction. Situation deteriorating. Then the tone changed. We've lost contact with sectors D and E. Thermal signatures show movement in the lower tunnels. Then, more desperate. They're learning. They mimic our frequencies. Last night, one of them knocked on the airlock. The final message came on day 19. The camera feed was shaky, filmed on a handheld unit. The person holding it wasn't wearing a uniform, just a patched thermal suit, face pale under flickering emergency lights. Behind them, the dome's inner walls were coated in a thin, shimmering film that pulsed faintly, like veins under skin. We've sealed the last 3 levels, the voice said, hoarse but steady. Only 12 of us left. Oxygen will last another week if we stay still. Power's at 18%. We tried everything. Lasers, sonic pulses, even dumping coolant into the vents. It just absorbs it, grows stronger. A pause. The camera panned to a window. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. In its place, tall, spindly shapes stood in the dark, dozens of them motionless facing the dome, waiting. We sent the call. Over and over, no reply. Not even an acknowledgement. Maybe you're too busy. Maybe you think we're lying, or maybe you just don't care anymore. Another pause, a deep breath. If anyone's listening, anyone at all, know this. We didn't die because we were weak. We died because no one answered. The feed cut out. On Earth, that message played once in a monitoring room, then was archived under unverified anomaly low priority. A technician shut off the screen and went to lunch, but not everyone forgot. In a cramped apartment above a water recycling plant in what used to be Nairobi, a woman who'd spent her childhood breathing air thick with volcanic ash watched the clip on a smuggled data chip. She'd seen that kind of hunger before, not in monsters but in droughts and wars, in the way the world looked away when suffering happened far from the cameras. In a submerged habitat 2 miles below the Pacific, a deep-sea engineer paused his maintenance log when the distress call summary scrolled across his terminal. He'd worked in crushing darkness for 20 years. He knew what it felt like to be forgotten. And in the irradiated forests of northern Siberia, a young woman who'd never known a world without Geiger counters humming in the background listened to the audio file 3 times. She heard the fear, yes, but also the dignity. The refusal to scream even at the end. They didn't know each other. They didn't even know they were all watching the same tragedy unfold. But something in that final message, the quiet accusation, the unbearable loneliness of it, stuck in their chests like a shard of ice. Because Earth hadn't just failed the colony on Varel 9. It had failed what it meant to be human. And somewhere, deep in the places the world had written off as wastelands, people who'd survived the impossible began to wonder if no one else would go. Maybe they should. The silence from Earth wasn't the end of the story, it was the spark. Nobody called them heroes, not back then. Most people didn't even know they existed. They lived in the cracks of the world, the places maps marked with warnings, not destinations. Places where the air burned your lungs, the water could blind you, or the ground itself seemed to hate you. But they stayed, not because they wanted to, but because leaving wasn't an option, or maybe after a while it just didn't feel like home anywhere else. In the eastern Congo, past the last functioning border checkpoint, the land dipped into a vast, steaming marsh. The water wasn't water anymore, it was thick with sulfur and heavy metals, bubbling like a pot left too long on the fire. Trees here grew twisted, their bark blackened, leaves coated in a fine yellow dust. People lived in stilt huts woven from reeds that had evolved to filter poison from the air. They breathed through cloth soaked in fermented algae, and their children learned to test the wind before stepping outside. They didn't wear masks like in the old pandemic days. Their bodies had changed. Slowly, over generations, their lungs grew tougher. Their blood learned to bind toxins instead of dying from them. Outsiders called it a wasteland. They called it home. Far to the north, beyond the last guarded fence of the Siberian exclusion zone, another kind of silence reigned. Not the quiet of snow, but the heavy hush of radiation. After the old nuclear plants failed decades ago, the area was sealed off. But some never left, and some were born there anyway. Kids with skin that tanned silver in sunlight, eyes that saw heat like snakes, and cells that repaired themselves faster than they broke. They drank filtered rainwater, ate mushrooms that glowed faintly in the dark, and wore clothes lined with lead thread fabric passed down from grandparents who'd once worked the reactors. Governments called them genetic anomalies. They called themselves survivors. And deep, so deep the sun was just a memory, beneath the Pacific Ocean, in pressurized pods bolted to the edge of a hydrothermal vent field, lived engineers, medics, and former submariners who'd chosen the abyss over the chaos above. At nearly 7 miles down, the pressure was enough to crush steel like paper. But their habitats held, their bodies adapted. Their minds learned to think in slow, steady rhythms like the pulse of the Earth's crust. They fixed deep-sea mining rigs, monitored tectonic shifts, and sometimes rescued stranded research drones. No one visited. No one called. But they kept the lights on just in case. For years, these places had nothing to do with each other. Then came the video from Varel 9. It spread quietly at first, through encrypted mesh networks, old satellite relays, smuggled data sticks passed hand to hand in black markets and underground clinics. Not the official news, not the polished government briefings, just raw footage, a trembling camera, a voice saying goodbye, and those tall, glassy shapes standing in the snow like statues waiting to wake up. Most people watched it and felt a chill, then moved on. But for those who lived in Earth's own death zones, it hit different. They recognized the look in that person's eyes. Not just fear, resignation. The kind you get when you've asked for help so many times that you stop expecting an answer. One evening, in a dimly lit room above a water filtration plant in East Africa, a woman who'd spent her life studying how humans adapt to poisoned environments pulled up every file she could find on Varel 9. She cross-referenced atmospheric data, thermal logs, even the chemical composition of the alien film seen on the dome walls. Then she sent a single message through a secure channel. They're not fighting a monster. They're fighting an ecosystem, and we know how to survive those. That message found its way to the deep-sea habitat. A veteran pilot who'd navigated volcanic vents in total darkness read it and replied within minutes. If someone's going, they'll need a ship that can handle extreme pressure shifts and unknown atmospheres. I know where to get one. From Siberia came a third note, short and sharp. Radiation disrupts energy-based life. I can help. No one asked for permission. No one filed a proposal. They just started talking. Across continents, through crackling audio lines and flickering screens using old military codes and fishing boat frequencies. They weren't soldiers. They weren't astronauts. They were people who knew what it meant to live where others wouldn't dare step. They called themselves nothing at first. But someone in the group, half-joking, said, "Earth's full of death worlds. Maybe we're the only ones who can handle another one." The name stuck. Deathworlders. They didn't have a base. They didn't have funding. But they had something better. Trust built in places where a single mistake meant death. They pooled resources. A retired deep-sea transport vessel, retrofitted with experimental fusion thrusters, was pulled from a salvage yard in the Pacific. Biofilters from the Congo marshes were adapted to scrub alien atmospheres. Radiation shielding from Siberian labs was woven into emergency suits. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't official, but it was real. Governments heard whispers. At first they laughed. A bunch of outcasts trying to play space rescue? But as the Deathworlders began testing engines and running simulations, the tone shifted. Officials called it reckless, unsanctioned, a potential biohazard risk. They threatened to seize the ship, block launch permissions, even arrest the crew. But then something unexpected happened. People started sharing the Varel 9 video again, this time with a new caption. Earth said no. But these people said yes. Footage of the Deathworlders working in their harsh homelands, repairing filters in acid fog, calibrating sensors in radioactive snow, welding hull plates in crushing ocean depths, went viral. Not as propaganda, but as proof. These weren't crazy dreamers. They were experts in survival. Crowdfunding campaigns popped up. Retired engineers donated spare parts. A former astronaut, disgraced after speaking out against space budget cuts, offered navigation software. Even dock workers in neutral ports turned a blind eye as crates of supplies were loaded under cover of night. The world wasn't ready to send a fleet, but it was ready to look away while a few stubborn souls tried anyway. The woman from the marshes stood on a rusted gantry overlooking the retrofitted ship, its hull patched with titanium from old satellites, its thrusters humming a low, steady note. She thought about the colonists on Varel 9 waiting in the dark. She thought about all the times she'd been told her home was uninhabitable, that her people were doomed, that nothing good could come from such a broken place. Now, that brokenness might be the only thing that could save someone else. Down in Siberia, the young woman packed a small case lined with lead. Inside were vials of stabilized isotopes, harmless to humans but disruptive to energy-absorbing organisms. She didn't know if it would work, but she knew silence had already failed. And miles beneath the ocean, the pilot ran final diagnostics. His hands moved with the calm of someone who'd faced the abyss before and never blinked. He keyed in the coordinates for Varel 9. The system accepted them without protest, no fanfare, no speeches. Just a group of people from the world's forgotten corners, stepping into the unknown because no one else would. They weren't heroes. Not yet, but they were answering the call. The ship didn't launch with fireworks or a countdown. It slipped away in the dead of night, riding a stolen maintenance window when orbital traffic was light and surveillance drones were cycling through blind spots. No flags waved. No crowds cheered. just a few figures in worn coveralls giving quiet nods before vanishing back into the shadows of the port. The vessel, patched together from a deep-sea cargo hauler, old lunar ferry parts and jury-rigged propulsion systems, wasn't built for space. But it had been rebuilt by people who knew how to make broken things work. Its hull still smelled faintly of salt and ozone, a reminder of the ocean depths it was never meant to leave. Now it climbed through the atmosphere like a fish learning to breathe air. Inside, the crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people used to tight spaces and high stakes. There were 6 of them, no more, no less. Every extra body meant more oxygen, more risk. They'd chosen each other not by rank or resume, but by who could stay calm when the lights went out and the walls started groaning. The pilot sat strapped into the command chair, fingers resting lightly on the controls. He'd spent 20 years navigating pitch-black trenches where one wrong move meant instant death. Space was empty, but it felt familiar, silent, patient, and utterly indifferent. He didn't need flashy displays. He trusted the hum of the engines, the slight vibration in the floor, the way the stars outside didn't twinkle like they did from Earth. In the rear module, the woman from the acid marshes checked the biofilters for the 10th time. She'd grown up watching her neighbors die from breathing the wrong wind. Now she'd rigged a system that could scrub alien microbes from the air, using engineered algae and recycled coolant. It wasn't pretty. Tubes snaked across the walls like veins, but it worked. She tested a sample from the ship's internal atmosphere. Clean. For now. Near the cargo bay, the one from the radiation zone sat cross-legged on the floor, calibrating a handheld emitter. It looked like a flashlight, but inside pulsed a controlled stream of beta particles, harmless to humans in small doses, but chaos for anything that fed on energy. She'd built it from scavenged medical equipment and reactor shielding. Her hands moved fast, sure. She didn't talk much, but when she did, everyone listened. She'd seen what happened when you ignored warning signs. She wasn't about to let that happen again. They weren't a military unit. They didn't wear uniforms. They wore patched thermal suits, gloves with the fingertips worn thin, boots that had walked through worse than space dust. They ate rehydrated meals that tasted like cardboard and shared a single flask of strong, bitter tea during shift changes. They argued over navigation routes, debated oxygen rationing, and once spent an entire evening trying to fix a glitch in the comms array using nothing but a paperclip and a piece of wire. But there was no panic. No grand speeches, just work, because they knew what was waiting for them. Varel 9 wasn't just far away. It was a death sentence wrapped in ice. The data they'd pulled from the colony's last transmission showed temperatures that would freeze fuel lines solid, atmospheric pressure that could collapse lungs, and something else, something alive, hungry, and learning fast. Conventional weapons wouldn't work. The alien life form didn't bleed. It absorbed. It adapted. It turned human technology against them. That's why they weren't bringing guns. They were bringing understanding. The woman from the marshes had studied how life clung to the most toxic places on Earth. Fungi that ate radiation, bacteria that thrived in battery acid, plants that pulled heavy metals from soil like candy. She believed the creatures on Varel 9 weren't evil. They were just surviving. And if you understood how something survived, you could find a way around it or through it. The pilot didn't care about the science. He cared about getting in, finding survivors, and getting out before the whole planet turned against them. He'd mapped 3 possible landing zones based on old mining surveys. 2 were already compromised, judging by the thermal bloom spreading from the colony site. That left one, a narrow canyon near a geothermal vent, shielded from the surface winds, maybe still defensible. The one from the radiation zone had a different plan. If the creatures fed on energy, then maybe they could be overloaded. Not destroyed, just confused, disoriented long enough to create an opening. She'd run simulations in her head for weeks. Now she was testing them in real time, adjusting frequencies, measuring output, watching for any sign of feedback. Halfway through the journey, a solar flare knocked out their long-range comms. For 3 days they were truly alone. No updates from Earth, no news. Just the ship, the stars, and the weight of what they'd promised. But no one wavered. When the comms came back online, there was a message waiting, not from any government, but from a network of underground tech collectives, oceanic research outposts, and desert survival camps, people who'd followed their launch through back-channel feeds. The message was simple. We're watching. We're with you. It wasn't official support. It was something better. human connection. As Varel 9 grew from a dot to a disk in the viewport, the crew ran final checks. Oxygen levels stable, hull integrity holding, biofilter cycling. The pilots slowed their approach, letting the ship drift into the planet's shadow. From here, they could see the damage. The colony dome was half collapsed, veined with that same pulsing black film from the video. Strange crystalline spires rose from the ice like broken teeth, and moving between them, slow, deliberate, were the shapes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. But near the eastern ridge, where the geothermal heat kept the ice thin, there was a flicker, a weak rhythmic pulse of light. Not natural, artificial. Someone was still alive, still signaling. The pilot adjusted course without a word. The woman from the marshes tightened the straps on her pack. The one from the radiation zone powered up her emitter, its soft blue glow reflecting in her eyes. They weren't soldiers. They weren't saviors. They were just people who'd been told their homes were worthless, their lives expendable, until the moment the world needed exactly what they'd learned to survive. Now, they were about to find out if that was enough. The ship descended through the thin, howling atmosphere, engines throttled low to avoid detection. Ice scraped against the hull. Alarms stayed silent. Outside, the purple sky darkened into night. And below, in the frozen silence of a dying world, someone waited. Not for a miracle, just for someone to show up. The landing was rough, not because the pilot lacked skill, but because Varel 9 fought back the moment they entered its sky. Ice shards the size of fists slammed into the hull. Winds howled like something alive, trying to tear the ship apart before it even touched ground. But they made it, sliding into the narrow canyon just as the last light bled from the sky, engines cutting out with a sigh of relief. For a long moment, no one moved. They just listened. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the only sound was the soft hiss of air recyclers and the thud of their own hearts. Then came the tapping, not on the hull, not from the comms, from inside the canyon walls. A slow, rhythmic click like stone on stone, but too precise to be natural. The woman from the acid marshes pressed her ear to the inner bulkhead. "It's mimicking our docking sequence," she whispered. "It's learning how we move." They suited up fast. Not bulky space gear. Lightweight, flexible suits lined with bioreactive mesh that could seal small tears and filter unknown pathogens. The one from the radiation zone carried her emitter like a lantern. The pilot checked the breaching tool, a modified deep-sea drill that could cut through ice or metal without sparks. They stepped out into the cold. It wasn't just cold. It was wrong. The air felt thick, charged, like standing under a storm that never broke. Their breath fogged, then froze mid-air, falling like glitter. The canyon walls shimmered with a faint blue sheen, the same film from the colony dome spreading like mold. Following the weak signal, they moved low and quiet, hugging the rock face. Every few steps, the woman from the marshes dropped a small pod that released a mist of engineered microbes, harmless to humans, but designed to disrupt the alien film's growth. Where the mist touched, the blue veins dimmed, then crumbled into dust. They found the survivors in a geothermal vault buried beneath a collapsed ice shelf. The entrance was sealed with a manual hatch frozen shut. The pilot used the drill to melt a narrow channel, careful not to trigger any seismic sensors. When the hatch groaned open, 12 faces stared back, hollow-eyed, wrapped in emergency blankets huddled around a single heat brick. No one cried. No one cheered. They just blinked, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "You came," one of them finally said, voice raw from disuse. "We did," the woman from the marshes replied, stepping inside. "How many left?" 12. "We were 13 this morning." A pause. "She didn't make it through the night. They didn't have time to mourn." Already the tapping outside had changed. Faster now. Closer. Back at the ship, they'd planned to load the survivors and leave within the hour. But Varel 9 had other ideas. As they helped the weak and wounded toward the canyon exit, the ground trembled. Not an earthquake, a pulse. From the direction of the main colony, a wave of black glass surged over the ridge, flowing like liquid but hardening as it moved. It wasn't chasing them. It was hurting them. "They know we're here," the pilot said, scanning the ridge with thermal goggles. "And they're cutting off our path." The one from the radiation zone stepped forward. "Then we give them something else to focus on." She activated the emitter. A low hum filled the air and a soft blue light spread from the device, washing over the canyon walls. Where it touched the alien film, the blue veins flared bright, then shattered like glass. The creatures recoiled, their forms rippling as if in pain. "It's working," the woman from the marshes said, eyes wide. "They're energy sensitive. Too much input and they overload." But the effect didn't last. Within seconds, the creatures adapted. Their surfaces darkened, absorbing the radiation instead of rejecting it. One stretched toward the emitter, tendrils reaching like fingers. "We can't hold them off forever," the pilot said. "We need to move, now." They ran, half carrying the survivors, boots slipping on ice. The canyon narrowed ahead, opening into a wider basin, where their ship waited. But between them and safety stood a wall of shifting black forms, rising from the ground like living statues. Then the woman from the marshes stopped. She pointed to a crack in the canyon floor, steaming faintly. "Geothermal vent, deep, unstable." The pilot understood instantly. "If we trigger a collapse, it'll bury them," she finished. "But it'll also seal the vault. No way out for us or them. They had minutes, maybe less." While the pilot guided the survivors toward a side tunnel that led to higher ground, the woman from the marshes and the one from the radiation zone set charges. Not explosives, but thermal lances repurposed from mining gear. They jammed them into the weakest points of the ice shelf above the vent. As they worked, one of the creatures broke from the group and lunged. It moved faster than anything they'd seen, silent fluid, its surface reflecting their helmet lights like a mirror. The one from the radiation zone shoved the woman aside and fired the emitter point blank. The creature froze, its form flickering between solid and liquid. Then it collapsed into a pile of dark shards, but more were coming. "Go!" the woman from the marshes yelled to the pilot. "Get them to the ship." The pilot hesitated. "What about you?" "We'll catch up." He knew better than to argue. He turned and ran, dragging the last survivor behind him. Alone now, the two women armed the final charge. The ground shook harder. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ice. Steam hissed from below. "We don't have time to run," the one from the radiation zone said, calm as ever. The woman from the marshes nodded. She keyed the detonator. The explosion wasn't loud, it was deep, a groan from the planet itself. The ice shelf split open, and superheated steam blasted into the canyon. The creatures shrieked, not with sound, but with a pulse of energy that made their suits' sensors scream in warning. Then the ground gave way. Tons of ice and rock crashed down, burying the creatures, the vent, and the path behind them. Silence returned. High on the ridge, the pilot watched the steam rise. He didn't see them climb out. He knew they wouldn't. Inside the ship, the survivors sat in stunned silence. One of them whispered, "They stayed behind." "For us?" The pilot didn't answer. He just powered up the engines and lifted off, climbing fast through the thinning atmosphere. Behind them, Varel 9 faded into the dark, its surface now scarred by a fresh wound of steam and ice. But as they cleared orbit, something strange happened. The last data burst from the geothermal vault, sent seconds before the collapse, contained more than just coordinates. Buried in the code was a final sensor reading. Deep beneath the planet's crust, something else was moving. Something bigger, older, and it was waking up. The creatures on the surface hadn't been the threat. They'd been running from it. The pilot stared at the readout, then switched off the display. They'd saved who they could. That was enough for now. As the ship turned toward home, the stars ahead seemed a little less cold, not because the danger was gone, but because someone had finally answered the call. The return to Earth wasn't like the stories. No brass bands, no victory parades. The ship came in low and quiet, slipping through orbital patrols like a ghost, landing not at a government spaceport but on a retired offshore platform in the North Atlantic. Rusted, forgotten, perfect for people who didn't want attention, but attention found them anyway. Word had spread, not through official channels, but through the same underground networks that had helped them leave. Fishermen spotted the ship descending. Satellite hobbyists tracked its heat signature. Within hours, shaky phone footage of the landing was everywhere, grainy, real, undeniable. And with it came the survivors. 12 people wrapped in thermal blankets, blinking in Earth sunlight like they'd never seen it before. Governments scrambled. Some called it a breach of interplanetary law. Others demanded quarantine, investigation, even arrest. But the public didn't care about protocols. They saw 12 living souls who'd been left for dead, and the ragged crew who'd gone to get them when no one else would. The woman from the acid marshes stood on the platform's edge, watching rescue boats cut through the waves. She hadn't slept in days. Her suit was torn, her hands raw from cold and work, but she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because they'd won, Varel 9 was still lost, and 2 of their own were gone, but because they'd proven something, that the world's outcast could do what its leaders wouldn't. News crews weren't allowed near it first. But that didn't stop people from showing up. Families of the survivors gathered on distant shores, holding signs with names and photos. Scientists sent messages begging for data. Former miners, deep-sea workers, desert medics, they all reached out saying the same thing. We're ready. Tell us what to do. Then came the turning point. A global broadcast, unplanned, unscripted, aired from a makeshift studio on the platform. One of the Varel 9 survivors spoke, voice trembling but clear. They described the silence from Earth. The fear, the moment they thought they'd die alone. Then they talked about the ship that appeared out of nowhere, crewed by people who looked like they'd walked through hell and brought back tools. And they didn't ask for medals, the survivor said. They just asked if we could walk. That clip played on every major network. Overnight, the story shifted. It wasn't about protocol or politics anymore. It was about humanity. Within a week, the United Nations held an emergency session, not to punish but to listen. The woman from the marshes, the pilot, and the others were invited, not as criminals but as witnesses. They brought data, sensor logs, and the final transmission from their lost teammate. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for fame. They asked for one thing, a chance to keep going. Out of that meeting came the Deathworlder Initiative, a new branch under the UN's Emergency Response Wing, but with one rule: no politicians in charge. Only those who'd lived in Earth's harshest places would lead. Their job? To train, equip, and deploy teams for off-world crises where conventional forces would fail. Training camps opened in the places once called wastelands. In the acid marshes, recruits learned to breathe toxic air and read ecosystems like language. In the Siberian exclusion zone, they studied radiation as a tool, not just a threat. In the deep ocean, pilots practiced navigation in total darkness, simulating alien atmospheres and unstable terrain. It wasn't glamorous. It was hard, dirty, and often dangerous. But for the first time, people from the edges of the world were being told their survival wasn't a flaw. It was a skill. A gift. 6 months after the return from Varel 9, a new signal came in. This one wasn't from a failing colony. It was from Proxima Centauri b, a research station studying ancient microbial life in subsurface lakes. Their last message was calm, professional. Unusual seismic activity. Possible subsurface breach, requesting status check, on Earth. The old system would have filed it under monitor and wait. But now things were different. Within hours, the Deathworlder Command Center, a repurposed deep-sea habitat floating off the coast of Chile, was alive with activity. Engineers checked ship integrity. Medics packed biostabilization kits. The pilot who'd flown to Varel 9 reviewed star charts, his hands steady as ever. And this time there was no debate. No silence. A message went out across secure channels, simple and clear. Hold on. The Deathworlders are coming. Back in the marshes, a new recruit, barely 18, born in a stilt hut where the air still burned, watched the launch prep on a cracked tablet. She'd signed up the day the initiative opened. Not for glory. Just because someone once came for people who'd been forgotten. And now, she could do the same. As the ship lifted off, riding a column of fire into the night sky, people all over Earth looked up. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with something rare these days. Hope. Because the lesson of Varel 9 wasn't just about aliens or ice or monsters in the dark. It was about who we become when the world stops caring, and who steps up when no one else will. The Deathworlders weren't heroes because they were fearless. They were heroes because they knew what it felt like to be left behind, and refused to let it happen again. And somewhere, in the endless dark between stars, another call was waiting. This time, Earth would answer.